lights were low enough, you guessed. You swapped your conscience with your father's medication. Limped from Rome to Lawrenceville, and on the way wrote out a self-made declaration. When you got to Pleasant Hill, you forced the traffic to erase your family demons. Made a pact with you and God. If you don't move, I swear to you, I'm gonna make you. Do you need me? Do you need?
Hey guys, how we doing today? Give me a little whoop whoop if you're with me today. You guys with me? Oh, there we go. That was good. Hey, we're really excited about today. If you're joining us here live or you're watching online, we are getting ready to launch into a new phase of our church called Seasons, because we believe that we should take a little bit of time each year to focus on some really big ideas. And the reason that we're doing this is because ultimately 514 Church is growing. We're in a season of growth. We have more people coming to the church. We have more people that call this place home, more people in small groups, and our staff is growing, and we are getting ready to move into a building phase soon. And we're just super trying to figure out the best way to lead through the growth and to do this better. We took some time and we looked at our vision statement as a leadership team recently. This is our vision statement: to cultivate in everything we do Jesus followers, passionate about reaching people who don't follow Jesus. And we thought, how can we do that better? How can we cultivate? How can we actually engage people? And one of the things that we were experiencing was sometimes some confusion with the calendar and what do we do when and where. And we have these ideas and these things that we actually teach you, and if you become a member of our church, we take you through this idea and these principles that we say these are the things that you should do, you should move down, you should become in order to become a member of 514 Church. And we thought maybe we need to take a more holistic approach, and instead of just having a series, have a season that transcends the series, a season that focuses on those four things that make us members, that make us who we are at 514 Church. So a little review is we tell you that you've got to grow. You've got to take your personal relationship with God, your knowledge of God, your relationship with God, your relationship with the scriptures. We tell you got to grow. You got to grow in that way. You got to do that through small groups, but you got to do that individually. You got to do that on Sunday morning. And we say that's what it means to become a member of 514 Church, to really engage in what this place is all about. And then we tell you that you need to serve. We say, hey, as Christ followers, the scriptures are very clear that we're not just supposed to be hearers of the word, but doers of the word, and that we are supposed to, if our faith is real, we're supposed to have our faith turn into actions, into serving people, to loving people, to caring for people. Jesus said, what you've done unto the least of these, you've done unto me. He teaches us over and over again that we're supposed to serve one another. Ultimately, in the New Testament, the whole idea with new is that in the Old Testament, we love God by doing what he tells us to do in a temple worship sacrificial system. And in the New Testament, he invites the whole world in, and he says, now, in order for you to love God, you have to love others. In fact, if you don't love others, you don't love God. And so if you say you love God, but you don't love people, you don't love God. So we have to serve one another. We have to care for one another, spend time, and then ultimately we have to build relationships with one another. We have to start to love one another, and at a relatively large church, it can be very difficult to be with people, to get to know people, to build relationships, to do life together, to do community together. And so we tell everyone you got to get in a small group. And right now we have 400 adults in small groups, 600 with our kids in small groups, but there's over 1,200, 1,300 people that call this place home. And so there's a lot of people who are not actually experiencing the relational side of what it means to be a healthy, faithful, fruitful follower of Jesus. And so we want to spend some time connecting on that or talking about connection, and we do that, but we want to spend more time on it. And then ultimately, we tell people that you need to invite someone to this church, because the whole maturation process, like when you are a follower of Christ, you move down this road of learning who he is. You start to learn, you grow, you learn who Jesus is, you learn the scriptures, you learn what faith is all about, you learn who Jesus is, you learn who you are, you learn who God is. You're learning. As you're doing that, you're serving people, you're caring for one another, you're lifting one another up, you're taking care of one another's burdens. Then you're connecting with people, you're doing fellowship together, you're encouraging one another, you're spending time together, you're breaking bread together, and ultimately, you're supposed to reach people. And we have said at this church that the hallmark of spiritual maturity is to reach and help people. That ultimately it's not knowing something, it's not just serving, it's not just connecting with one another, it's actually that we move into the dark spaces, that we reach people. Jesus said, when he called his first disciples, he said to the first what the process would be and what the result of following him would be. He said, come and follow me, and I will make you into fishers of men. He didn't say, I will make you into really smart people. He didn't say, I'll make you into people that help people and serve and feed people. He didn't say, I'm going to help you guys all get along. He said, ultimately, I'm going to move into your space and reach you, and I've fished for you, and now you are going to go fish. You're going to connect with people. You're going to love people. And ultimately, reaching and helping people, that's what this is all about. And so what we're going to do is we're going to launch into seasons together. We're going to launch into seasons that kind of take 3 months out of the year to go through these things, and it doesn't mean that these things are the only thing that matter. It just means they're really, really important. And it doesn't mean that when we're talking about growing, we're not serving. We're still doing that. It's just we're taking a little bit of time to focus on something that we should be living out all of the time. That's the idea of seasons. I love when seasons come around. It's really fun, especially we just transitioned right into this fall season. How many people love the fall? How many people would say, my favorite season is the fall? Yeah, there's a guy that knows all about you, and his name is Jim Gaffigan. Watch this.
Fall, people love fall.
It's my favorite season.
It's not a competition.
My favorite season that I'm voting for in America's next top season is fall.
People that love fall, they go crazy for the foliage. They're like, oh, the foliage! Let's drive by the foliage! It's so beautiful the way the leaves die. They're so pretty right before they fall to their death. We think it's beautiful. It's the leaves' hospice. It also helps that the leaves can't talk. If they could talk, they'd be like, ah! Give me chlorophyll! Why are these people driving by and smiling at me? You monsters! We're rather insensitive to the leaves' tragedy. They die, they fall to the ground, we just rake them up. Kids, you want to jump on this pile of dead leaves? No? All right, I'll just light them on fire. The poor leaves, all they know is spring and summer. And then in October, they're like, where's everyone going? Early in November, you always see a couple leaves hanging on. They're like, I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna make it through winter. Me and my buddy Carl, right, Carl? Carl. The pine trees, they must resent the attention the leaves get. Stupid leaves. Everyone's driving by looking at the pretty leaves. I don't even bother to get to know them. After a couple months, they're dead. Come December, you'd be climbing a ladder, stick a star on my head. Why would a pine tree sound like it's from Brooklyn? How many jokes about seasons does this guy have?
The thing that's great about seasons is they tell us what to do, right? So when there's a season and you move into that season,
fall, people love
and the
fall.
weather changes.
It's my favorite season.
And the weather changes, the seasons, it's so funny, we should watch it again. The seasons, they tell us what to do, right? Like when the weather breaks and the leaves change, then we all know, like, oh, we got to get out our boots, we got to get out our jeans, we got to do this. They tell us what we're supposed to do. And so what we want to do at the church is we want to say, hey, this is what season it is, because seasons communicate. Here's what it's time to do now. It's time to rake the leaves. It's time to, like, go get pumpkins. It's time to celebrate. They tell us what is going on. They tell us what we're supposed to do. And then they help us focus. They give us an extreme sense of clarity because seasons tell us what not to do. Like when it becomes fall and then it turns into winter, I don't set up the kid pool out in my yard for the kids because they'd freeze their little toes off. I might have to do that as like a punishment, but I'm not going to do that because it's not the right season, right? And then when the spring comes or when the summer comes, we don't go hang out Christmas lights. I mean, right? Pumpkins represent the season. They don't cause it. Pumpkins represent the season. And so what we're going to do is we're going to tell the church, hey, this is what season it is. This is a special season. It is a season of learning. We are in a season of serving. We are in a season of connecting. We are in a season of inviting. And then everything we do during those seasons, that season is telling us it's time to learn. That season is telling us now it's time to serve. And it doesn't mean that we're not going to connect other times, but we're going to focus on serving and wait until it's time to connect. When we think about all these different seasons, it's really exciting, some of the stuff that we have planned. We have this vision as a leadership team that at 514 Church, when we're in the season of learning, that everyone is like, this is what I'm doing right now. I'm going to read something I haven't read before. I'm going to take a class that the church has provided so that I can gain a more basic theological understanding of the scriptures and who God is. I'm going to learn what it means to become a member of 514 Church. I'm going to study something new. And we want everyone to be growing in their knowledge of God and in their knowledge of themselves and potentially their knowledge of someone else. Imagine if everybody took a season to grow, to just learn something, to actually gain some more knowledge, to start the year out focused on something new, something inspirational, something that might help you in your journey. All the church, we take a minute. It doesn't mean connecting's not important. It doesn't mean serving's not important. It means right now we're learning. And we want everyone during that time to be walking around saying things like, I'm learning. I'm learning this. I'm learning that. I'm learning this. I'm learning about Jesus. And we just have a culture. And so what we're going to do, like when you come in next week and we start the first season, you're going to see that these seasons are going to have, the hallways are going to be decorated. You're going to be handed things because we want the season to tell us what to do. And so we'll have a season of learning, and then we'll move into a season of serving. And part of why we're doing it this way is because it helps us from a leadership perspective know what to do when. As opposed to just moving stuff around on a calendar and looking at different holidays, we know, hey, we're in a season of serving. So you can rest assured that next year during this season, during April, between April and June, this is when we'll do Serve Cbus, where we put everybody together and we said we're going to have a corporate pouring out of service to the whole city. And we had an amazing experience this year. We're close to 300 people all served. Well, we're going to have lots of opportunities for serving. We're going to do a big emphasis during this season on getting more people to volunteer here, to serve, to give their time to make Sunday morning grow. We're going to talk about serving. We're going to highlight people who are serving. We're going to celebrate people who are serving. We're going to have a season of serving. It's going to be a celebration of serving. So, are you guys with me a little bit? Yeah, I just want, does this make sense? We want to have clarity around what we're doing and why. And so setting the tone says it's a season of learning. We're not doing other things on purpose because this is so important. We're going to have a season to serve, and then we're going to have a season to connect. Like I mentioned, we believe that the lifeblood, and we know from data that the lifeblood of people growing spiritually actually happens in our small group environments, that relationships are built, that connectivity is made with God, that is, it's not something that can happen in here. And so we're actually having dialogues that are somewhat radical for church to say, are we going to maybe stop even measuring what happens in here and measure more what happens in a small group and get better at small groups? But there's a lot of people in here who are not in a small group. And we need you to get in one because we want you to grow. We want you to learn. We want you to experience community. And so there's a lot of people that aren't in a long-term small group. So during this season of connecting, we're going to give you options for short-term small groups. We're going to give you options for medium-term long groups. We're going to give you options to join a life group. We're going to give you all kinds of options to connect. We're going to try to get everyone that calls 514 Church, everyone that calls it their home, to get them connected into relationships, and the puppy is thrown in. And then the last season of every year, so we'll start off the season with learning, we'll move into a season of serving, we'll move into a season of then connecting, and then we're going to end every season with the goal in mind, and that's the season of invitation. Because like I said, we believe that the purpose of our faith is not that we would just learn something, it's not that we would just serve someone, it's not that we would just get together, but that we would reach and that we would help people. And what we're going to do over the season of invitation is we are going to take this idea of invitation and we're going to flip it up in the air and we're going to turn it over, and it's not just going to be something as simple as inviting people to church, which you should invite people to church, but we want you to go way further than just getting the gumption or boldness to invite someone to church. We want you to start to think that invitation is more than a moment, that it's a lifestyle, that you should be inviting yourself into the world you live in, that you should go to your neighbor's house, that you belong at your neighbor's table, you belong with your friends, you belong with those people at your job that don't think like you think and don't act like you think. You see, we've had this notion here, and I'm going to talk about this throughout the coming weeks. We're going to talk about it as a church, that belonging, it means that people belong with us, but the reality is behind belonging is that when you believe that you're called to live an invitational lifestyle, you actually believe that you belong with them. And what God does for us is He creates this confidence inside of us where we understand who we are and we know God. And it's not that we're moving into people's space and we think we belong with them because of who we are, but we just have to be with them because we love people. We just care about people. We just want to be with people. And God has called the people of God to go be with all kinds of people. And so we belong with them. And so we're going to challenge everybody to invite people to church. We're going to challenge everybody to invite themselves into people's world. We're going to, during the season of invitation, I am going to give an invitation every single week after every message for someone to receive the invitation of Jesus Christ. We have never done that at our church. You see, how many people grew up in church and they gave an invitation every Sunday? See, churches I grew up, that's what you do every Sunday. Well, we do it sometimes. We'll kind of like do it sporadically. And we're still going to do it sporadically throughout the year. It's kind of a perfect example of what seasons look like. But during the season of invitation, every single week, we're going to give an option for someone to accept the invitation of Jesus Christ, to become their Lord, to become their master, to become their Savior. And so what that should do for those of us that love Jesus is that should inspire us to bring people so that they can have an opportunity to hear the gospel message and maybe accept the invitation of Christ. We're also going to have 2 big baptism Sundays in the invitation season where we want to get anyone that's accepted Christ or anyone that has accepted Christ in the past and received the invitation to follow Jesus, they're going to be baptized, and we're going to celebrate that because it's a season of invitation. We're going to just be talking about invitation. We're going to be teaching invitation. We're going to be giving you handles for your faith. We're going to be doing everything we can to make it a season of celebration and invitation. And so what I want to give you guys today is just a little sermonette. Say, give me a sermonette, Joel. Say, thank you for the sermonette. And I'm sure you guys would prefer I do a sermonette most of the time, right? You guys could probably use a sermonette more than the sermon. Wait a minute, the sermonette, is that like a 20-minute version of what you normally take 40 minutes to do? Yes, it is, my friends. Right now, I've been up here talking for 17 minutes, 18 minutes, and 2.5 of those minutes was Jim Gaffigan. So now I'm going to take the next 15 minutes and give you a sermonette. Say, give me a sermonette, Joel. Here's the deal. Invitation, to get us started down this road of invitation. We're moving into a season of invitation. Invitation is something that happens a couple of different ways. It can be something that you do because you're told to do it. And a lot of Christians have invited people to church because of guilt, because they've been, somehow coerced, compelled, provocated, whatever it is, by the pastor to go invite. And maybe the pastor has said, that's your job. And to a degree, it is our job. But it should be the fruit of a relationship of something real. And so if you're sitting in here today and I say, hey, you need to invite people to know Jesus. You need to invite people to come to church. You need to invite people into your life. You might be going, man, that just seems like too much. Like I'm an introvert, or I don't know what to say, or I don't know how to explain my faith, or I'm not sure that the conversation fits in the world that I live in. And we understand all that. We understand that all of that is real. But the key to invitation is something beyond it being like something that's mandatory. The key to invitation is when something happens to you that you just can't stop. I had a buddy that used to say that when we live our lives in this invitational way, when we live our lives with this inspiration about who Jesus is, that it's like we went to a party and we filled up our bowl with chili, right? You fill up your bowl with chili and you might have put a little too much chili in the bowl, and then the party gets busy and you're walking around, and every time you walk into somebody, you get a little chili on them. You're like, oh, I'm sorry, I just got some chili on your shoes. Sorry, man. I just got some chili on your shirt. I'm sorry, here's a napkin. It's just so good. I just love this chili. Give me more chili. Right? You just love chili, that you're talking about the chili's on your face, the chili's on your shirt, the chili's on someone's shoes, because your cup overfloweth with turkey chili. By the way, North Star has the greatest turkey chili of all time. Amen. You got to go get that. But I mean, this is the kind of thing, that's the idea, is when you get genuinely inspired by something, then it naturally kind of moves its way into people's lives whom you're around. And so I want to put it this way. The key to invitation is genuine inspiration, is when you have something happen in you that is uncontainable. Uncontainable. And if Jesus Christ is who he says he is, and we understand him to be who he says he is, then there should be a moment at times where the joy of knowing Jesus becomes uncontainable. And now, a lot of us have grown up and we've heard stories, and we're like, dude, I get it. And people have heard it, and then people associate wrong things with it. I'm sorry. You can come back to the person of Jesus Christ, to who he really is. And when you care about people and you care about God, it is impossible not to have your love for both come out in a conversation. So, the key to invitation is not doing it because I said so. It's not doing it because you're in trouble if God says you don't. It's doing it because I saw Jesus, I know Jesus, and this is real, and he rose from the dead, and he offers me something, and I am moved by it, and it is a part of my inner monologue, it's a part of my dialogue, it is a part of my life that I cannot contain. It's chili in a bowl. And so what we're gonna do is, before we kind of totally heavily launch into the invitation season, which culminates with Christmas, the easiest holiday to invite people to, we are going to take 3 weeks, starting next week, to kind of reinvigorate our hearts for the way, the Christian life, what Christianity is. And I guarantee you, if you take some time with me over the next 3 weeks to look at the way, because when the church first started, it wasn't called the church and it wasn't called Christianity. Actually, that was a derogatory term. Christians were like little Christians. That was like negative. What they were called was the way. And I guarantee you, if we take some time to look at it, to take a fresh look, especially for those of us that may have grown up in the church, that you'll see that the way is better than you thought. It's way better than you thought. It's way better. And the only reason you're saying yeah is because you know that, and that's why everyone else isn't, because maybe they don't know that. Because they're like, how, what's great about this? So what I'm gonna do over the next couple weeks is I'm gonna talk about heaven and what a classic view of heaven is, and how the scriptures actually don't teach at all what a lot of us believe about heaven, and the cross, and how the scriptures actually teach what a lot, very differently than what a lot of what we think about the cross is. and the resurrection as well. And we're going to take a totally fresh look at those three things. And I think that after that, you'll be like, this is good. That surprised me. Because if it's as good as God says it is, if it's as good as what got us here, a 2,000-year-old faith, then you have something to be hopeful for. You have something to be looking forward to. And so what I want to do is I just want to start us off with one thought today, and then we'll launch into this conversation of surprise over the next 3 weeks. And that is that when you are invited to know Jesus, and how many people have ever been invited to know Jesus? Raise your hand. Invited. And if you know him, what that meant, and you may not know that this is what that meant, but what that meant was you are picking in your life who is going to be your king. Now, we don't have kings per se. We don't have the classic idea of what a king is in our minds, in our society today. Because the world's changed and democracy, and it's just different. But ultimately, you do understand when someone is the leader of your life, or something is the leader of your life. That's what a king was. A king had full authority. A king was totally in charge. A king you paid tribute to, and you were a subject of the king. You belonged to the king in centuries past. And when you invite Jesus into your life, ultimately what you're saying in modern terms is, Jesus is now the leader of my life. He's my leader. That means what he says, I'm going to do. That means what he asked me to do, I'm going to do it. That means that I'm going to worship him. That means I'm going to spend my time on him. That means what he thinks about, I care about most. Now, when we think about what that is in our life, what leads us, who leads us, I want you to just take a minute and think about who that is or what that is. Is it Jesus or is it something else? Is it your ego? Is it money? Is it fame? Is it pain? What is it? Is it some type of experience? Is it some type of erotic feeling? What leads you? What drives you? What is the master of your life? Could you sit in the room today and say, it's Jesus. Jesus is the master of my life. When he says jump, I say, how high? Or is it something else? Because what I want to remind us of today as we spring into the season of invitation is that Jesus as our leader is so exceptionally refreshing, so beautiful and different than any other type of leader that you could follow. Where every other type of leader on the earth requires something from you, makes you be its subject, makes you serve it. We have in Jesus the God of the universe who could have said, all of you are my subjects. You need to serve me. And actually, when he was on earth, he said, you want to be great? You want to see what it means to be great? You want to see what it means to follow me? And he washed the disciples' feet. Ultimately, he said, me being your king is very different than anything else being your king because I'm going to serve you. I'm going to not make you my subjects. I'm going to become your subject. And instead of Jesus playing the authoritative God card on earth, he played the submissive card of surrender and servanthood. Now, without going into anything else, what is more attractive to you? An authoritarian bully or a servant? Let's say one is God and one is not. Why would you not follow the servant who is also God, as opposed to the tyrant who isn't? You see, when we decide to follow Jesus, we are following the most beautiful master ever. Anything, nothing compares to the mastery and the leadership and the kingship of Jesus. In the New Testament, Paul who basically is in charge of and was responsible for bringing the Christian message, a native Jewish religion and idea to the whole world. And ultimately, he ended up in prison under Rome, under a king, a captive in a Roman prison. And he understood what it meant to be trapped by that king and what it meant to serve that king, because ultimately he was in prison because he didn't serve that king. So following Jesus meant becoming a prisoner of a different king. We don't have those kind of circumstances today right now, at least not in this country. There are people that because Jesus truly is their king, they are not allowed to live their lives. This was Paul. Paul was trapped by a king who demanded that people become his subjects. He would not, because he had a different king. And while he's in prison, in probably 51, I believe it was, AD, 20 years after Jesus leaves, he's so captivated by the kingship of Jesus that while he is in prison of Caesar, he writes a letter to one of his churches, one of the churches that he had a big heart for, that he started, that actually gave him a lot of material possessions and a lot of currency to do ministry. So he actually takes some time while he's in prison to be thankful to this church. Now that's amazing. Just think about that for a second. That's amazing. If you were in prison, would you be writing thank you notes? Probably not. Paul was writing thank you notes. So what he does is he says to the church in Philippi, he says, all in the backdrop, I'm under the oppression and in chains of a tyrannical Caesar who calls himself the Son of God. We serve the actual Son of God, Jesus. And he says to those people, have this mind in you. He says to them, have the attitude of Christ Jesus. Have the attitude of Christ. And then he says this, Philippians chapter 2, in this letter. Have the attitude of Jesus, who, Jesus, being in the very nature God, actually divine, actually creator, actually the Son of God, actually having all authority, actually having all power, actually with the capability of making everyone his servant, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. So here's what this means. He says, I'm in shackles because this king is using his God card to put me in shackles, to try to shut this thing down. Now, God could have done any of that. God could have brought an army into the world and just destroyed all of Rome. He could have just put all of the bad people in prison. But instead, God, who was God, didn't play the God card. Instead of using authority to influence, he used servanthood to influence. Instead of using earthly power, he used heavenly love. And he says, now you get to choose. You get to choose who you're going to let lead you. You get to choose who's going to be your king. When Jesus was standing before Pilate, an authoritative representative of Rome, he had a conversation with him. This is at his trial before he was executed. You say you're the king of the Jews. You say you're the king of the Jews. I am the king of the Jews. God made me the king of the Jews. King of the Jews. He goes back, Pilate, to the mobs that are sick and tired of Jesus saying that he's God. And he says, I see nothing wrong with this man. This man's done nothing wrong, and he's your king. The religious leaders, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Sanhedrin, the chief priests stand in the crowd with Jesus getting ready to go to a cross, and they say these words. You can go read this in one of the four Gospels. They say, we have no king but Caesar. They pick Caesar, who ultimately, through his form of execution and torture, with his power to make everyone a subject, takes the God of the universe, the real king, and puts him on a cross. And Pilate puts above Jesus' head, you know what it says? King of the Jews. A king. A king. And in that picture of Jesus being put on a Roman cross by a Roman king, he says, do you see the difference? You see the difference? You see, kings and emperors, they put people on crosses. And Jesus willingly climbed on one. Jesus climbed onto a cross. You know why he climbed onto a cross? To serve you. To serve you. That was Jesus' ultimate move of servanthood. Being the precious, spotless Lamb of God, one thing in all created order could actually take away the sin of humanity, and it was God in the flesh. And so he did not climb on a cross just to prove a point. He climbed on a cross to make a difference. Make a difference. The difference that he made was, you and me are separated from God because of our sin. I have to die in your place. So, I'm not going to make you my subjects. I'm going to serve you and then let you decide. You decide who you're going to serve. The king who puts people on crosses or the king who climbs on one for you? Who are you going to serve? What kind of king do you want to be led by? The one who has all the power and leverages their power to make subjects, or the one who has all the power and doesn't play the God card just for you and me? Just a thought. You know, we talk about following Jesus a lot. We talk about him. And it's hard, right? And there's whole sects of people throughout the ages, throughout the first and second centuries, that actually believe that in order to serve Jesus, you have to hurt yourself. Asceticism is what it's called, where you hurt yourself. Because they believe that the suffering of Jesus meant in order to be like Jesus, we have to make ourselves suffer. It's a gross misinterpretation of the reality. You see, the reality is this. As a Christ follower, you are called to serve, to be like your king. You're called to serve. Jesus, in his service, it took him to the cross. He had to die on a cross. And that was painful. You are called to serve, and it will be painful. God is not saying, go find some pain, inflict yourself with pain, and then follow me. He's saying, go and serve people, and it will hurt. It will hurt to lay down your life. It will hurt to suffer for others. It will hurt to do what you have to do in order to love people. But if you want to be like me, like your king, you don't play the God card as a human. You play the servant card. You love people. You care for people. You give your life away for people. And in that, there is no greater love than when you lay down your life, you suffer to bring goodness to the people around you. It's a surprise when we think about the goodness of our King and how he just humbly stands there and says, you can serve him, you can serve them, whatever that thing in your mind, it does not care about you. Anything else that's leading you besides God doesn't care about you. Jesus cares about you. He died for you. He suffered for you. He rose from the dead for you. He offers you an invitation to be a part of his kingdom, to look like him and be like him and bring beauty and restoration to the world. Where most kings start on thrones and end up on crosses, Jesus started on a cross and ended up on a throne. He started with thorns and it led to a throne. And that throne he invites you and me to be a part of. So what we're going to do is we're going to take communion right now. And communion is a time to remember what Jesus did on the cross. To remember that the night that he was betrayed, the night of the Last Supper, right before his execution, he took some bread and he took some wine. We use juice because of liability. So he took some bread and he took some wine, and he said, this bread represents my body, which is broken for you. As often as you do this in remembrance of me. Now hang with me, this is really cool. And then he said, take this wine, drink it. As often as you drink it, do it in remembrance of me, because my blood is being shed for the forgiveness of your sins. When Jesus did that, just hang with me for a second, this is powerful. When Jesus did that, he did it thousands of years after the main reason that they were celebrating that night. You see, the reason that they were there was thousands of years before that, the nation of Israel was set free from prison in Egypt, from slavery. And so the Jewish people every year would come together and celebrate their deliverance from slavery. The Passover is what they called. Jesus Christ had the gumption, had the boldness to take a 2,000-year-old tradition that meant the most important monumental moment in the history of a nation and said, hey, from now on, you ain't getting together to talk about that. You're going to get together and talk about me. Now you're going to get together and talk about me and what I'm about to do, my blood, my body. Now that means he was either crazy or he is God, and he entered into something new. He brought something beautiful into our space. He brought something new for you and me that says, now you don't have to jump through religious hoops and sacrifice animals in order to have a relationship with me. You just have to embrace the person of Jesus Christ, and I become your sacrifice once and for all. Something beautiful, something new, something fresh. Imagine if I stood up here today and I said, we are no longer going to set up Christmas trees for Christmas. From this day forward, you will put a giant gourd in your family room. You would be like, that's insane. That's not even half of as insane as what Jesus did. He ushered something new in. He said, come on, be a part of me. A different kind of king, a different kind of leader, a better type of life. Bring life to people around you by loving them however you need to. That's what it means to follow and have the attitude of Jesus. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to say a prayer, and I want you to start to let God rattle your soul for someone. Someone that needs invited, someone that needs brought from the outside in, someone that needs loved on, someone that you need to go to. Someone needs to know this refreshing King, needs to know this amazing Son of God. And I want you to just pray, and then I'm going to pray with you. And when I say amen, you're going to stand up and find the nearest station, find the bread, dip it in the juice, go back to your chair, sit down, take some time to remember that the only reason that we can worship Jesus is because he opened the door with the cross. So let's take a minute and pray. Father, I just thank you so much that you invited us into a relationship with you. God, the only reason we're invited in is so that we can invite others in. I pray, God, that we would just fall in love with you, that we would see you fresh, that this season of invitation as we kick it off with communion would be all about genuine inspiration for who you are. Help us to be moved by you. Help us to see how much better and how much more holy and beautiful you are as a leader. Help us to take every leader, everything, every person that we follow in our life and put them right next to you and just bow in submission to you. Instead of our pride, instead of our pleasure, instead of that person, help us to worship you and you alone. We love you, and we take this bread and we take this cup and we do it in remembrance of you. Amen.